your premier communication platform for corporate employee engagement and lots of fun on the side. For those of you tuning in for the first time, my name is Paul Geiger. I am a public speaking consultant and a business communication strategist out of New York City. I make sure that messaging is delivered with the right amount of gravitas, with the right amount of humor when needed, so that you engage with people and allow them to trust you and ultimately be persuaded. Glenn, it is good to see you, my friend. Oh, Glenn, we can't hear you.
Thank you. It must be Friday the 13th somewhere.
Gremlins,
Yes.
leftover. Friday the 13th fell on a Thursday this month.
That's right. Okay. Hey guys, my name is Glenn Ingram. I've been working for the last 2 decades to help people become better listeners, better communicators, so they can be better influencers and help people make buying decisions. Welcome, Ben, to this finally late start of Blabbit.
Thank you. It is better late than never.
True.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, guys.
Sure. Tell everybody a little bit about the work that you do, Ben.
Sure. Plain and simple, I'm an executive and career coach. What lights me up is helping people live more purposefully and find work that lights them up and remove the blocks that are in their way so that they can live a more fulfilled life. And I do that at my company, purposeup.com. What do you guys think of that intro?
I think you've covered a lot of bases, and we're going to cover a whole lot more bases here in this episode. And of course, Ben, thank you for being here and returning to Blabbit once again. And I'm sure you have some interesting new insights to share. Glenn, did you have something you wanted to share? No. Okay. Then let me dive right in. Let me dive in with this one. People are shifting around their careers. You are a success career executive coach, so you do help a lot of these individuals pivot. And what's interesting is, even if you're not a senior leadership person, just someone who wants to make a transition, can you be a myth buster for us and dispel the whole idea of what actually happens when you apply to a job online? And why is it you never get, or you very rarely get, interviews out of that? Just kind of clear up that whole process, because is it just wishful thinking?
There's actually a black hole out there that all the resumes get sucked into, and a select few kind of circle back down to earth and land in front of recruiters. So just to dispel any myths, that is what happens. But in all seriousness, applicant tracking systems is the software, ATS, that organizes resume submissions. And the reality of where we're at in today's world is most, if not all, companies use one or multiple applicant tracking systems. And with the advent of LinkedIn Easy Apply and ways to just apply very quickly, the number of applicants is, for any given job, is over 100 to 500, depending on the type of position. So a couple of things are happening. One, it's a sheer numbers game. And the attention span of somebody on the other end of receiving that, what they're seeing is a couple of different things. One is probably a preferred pile that is algorithmically served up. So those will get priority. And then the ones that are deprioritized may or may not get seen. It depends on the organization. But with all of that, like a Google search and the Google algorithm, what happens is they're often can be prioritized depending on their relevancy for what keywords the job, company, organization posting it sets. And so, especially for people who are pivoting careers that don't have an exact match for the job, they can often be scuttled to the bottom. And in today's age, nobody's really incentivized for finding talent that could be a good fit and making a case for it. It's just like nobody's got time for that. So often you just want to fit a square peg in a square hole. And that's why oftentimes just a sheer numbers game. It's like going to Vegas and playing a game where the odds aren't in your favor.
Okay. Are there games in Vegas where the odds are in your favor?
I mean, are we talking metaphorically here? Are we talking about job searching here? Because,
Well,
I like poker myself because, and I'll tie this back, there's a strategy to it, and you can improve your odds and you can understand how the game is played and how to read other players. So to tie it back to job searching, a couple of different things that people can do. If they apply for a job, you can always use LinkedIn, work to find the hiring manager, and that's better than not contacting somebody. That's improving a point of contact. When I work with my clients, what I advise them to do, and let's call this the poker instead of the, blackjack or just the slot machine approach. Let's call it the slot machine approach, is just applying online. Playing the poker game is much more strategic. So what we want to do is we want to find the targets of the companies that we're looking for. We want to be clear on the criteria that we're looking for in a company, what industry, what company culture, and understand where we're targeting. From there, we can craft personalized outreach to people that is not, hey, do you have any jobs? I'd like to get to know you, like that use people, but targeted communication that gets people to the next step in developing a relationship and has a giver mentality versus a taker mentality. And then creating a funnel from that to create enough outreach to generate enough return on that outreach to then go into informational interviews, asking the right questions in informational interviews and being prepared for those. And that then leads to more career and interview conversations. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think that's great for a percentage of our population, and it doesn't matter their age, that are just thinking, oh, it's the old days. I can just fill this out and someone's going to reach back to me. You probably have a better chance of winning betting on red than just thinking someone's going to respond to you without doing all the follow-up and setting yourself apart, correct?
I mean, 100%. Like if you're betting on red, I don't know what those odds are, but let's just call it 50%. If you're up against 100 or 200 applicants, those are those odds right there. When you're reaching out to somebody cold, let's say 1 in 4 to 1 in 3 will respond to you. And so one important thing to remember is, this is the 4 SWs that I love. Some will, some won't. So what? Someone's waiting. And that the 4 SWs are great to get us past that fear of rejection or the fear of nobody getting back to us. So we don't take it personally and we can still work on creating that funnel for ourselves of communication.
Well, it's interesting, the motivation, and this is something that we spoke about, Glenn, just last week when we were speaking with Mark Moskowitz, and that is the motivation and the discipline. So the motivation is, I've got to get in touch with some of the right people. The discipline, you just touched on it a little bit there, Ben, the idea of being able to keep your sense of rejection in check so that you can continue to do those sorts of things. But a thought just came into my mind, and that is, isn't the dynamic a little strange, though? You have to consider that the individuals who are on the receiving end of information, whatever it is you're going to be giving them, they kind of know what your agenda is. Is there a mindset that you need to adopt to be able to deliver that in a way that's fresh and unique, or does it necessarily not have to be so fresh and unique, just something that would matter even just slightly to the person on the receiving end of that outreach?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I was just on a business coaching call the other day, and they talk about this the skill level between your communication or persuasion versus volume of outreach. So the better and more skilled you are at the communication, the less outreach you have to do, but the worse you are, the more outreach you have to do to get the same volume.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, what we want to do is we want to get as skilled as quickly as we can. And so there's a few different techniques we can use to land with the person who's receiving this. One is looking at their profile thoughtfully and appealing to their ego. Hey, John, I wanted to reach out and introduce myself, but first, let me tell you, I'm really impressed with the way your career has evolved from A to B, especially the specific thing that I researched that's not just in your about section, that shows that I did some digging, so that you're flipping those switches in their mind that, okay, this person cares a little bit more than the average person. They're doing their homework, and maybe I know they're sucking up to me, but they're doing it in a good way. Right. So like, I've got those LinkedIn communications where it's like, Ben Stein, congratulations on your Cannes Gold Lion Win Award. And that was from like 10 years ago when I was in advertising. I'm like, this person is using an automated thing to pull something and reach out to me. I'm like, nope. Right. But if it's something like about a post I did, and I'm like, okay, I know you got an angle, but well played. Let's see what you got. So that's technique number one. Technique number two is appeal to them for help. And so what I like to say is, hey, John, I'm looking for my next best career steps, and I could really use your help and would like to tap into some of your wisdom. Again, appealing to the ego, not necessarily asking for a job, because that puts people in an awkward position. Like, hey, any open positions? They're like, you're using me. And then so you appeal to their wisdom, ask for help, because people do like to help. Some people don't have time, but some people do. And so with that, you're asking for help. Then you say, okay, would you be open to 10 or 15 minutes with me, giving them an easy ask and then giving them an out? And if not, that's totally okay. Just let me know. Right. And that out kind of makes it feel less presumptive and helps them receive it. Do those make sense?
Absolutely. I usually advise that too, right, Glenn? You've heard me say often appeal to an individual's sense of wanting to be helpful, just naturally wanting to be helpful. I think the majority of us do, but at times we just get jaded by the volume that may be coming our way. What were you going to say, Glenn?
Well, I was going to say two things. First, Ben must come from some decent sales training, because I've preached that to years for the people that want to use a standard model. If you're not very good at communicating, persuading, you need to contact more people. If you're good at contact persuading, you can contact less and reach the same goal. So it's kind of knowing your numbers, we call it in sales. Now, Paul, I don't remember who it was. I think it was our friend up in the Northwest that does HR that mentioned to us here that the algorithms on a lot of these job placement boards are really set to defeat 90% of the people, because if your experience and your cover letter doesn't match the job, you're already starting off at a D and almost slipping into an F. Do you have any experience with that, Ben, as far as what it takes just to get your application and your resume to catch someone's attention so you're not starting off at the bottom of the pile?
Sure. So as part of my coaching package, I've added resume done for you services as part of that. And it's not because I love resumes, but because it is so needed in today's ATS driven world to create a resume that lights up both the machine and the human. So, for example, if you're more of a do-it-yourself type of person, there's a decent, like you can use something like Zety, Zety, as a resume and cover letter builder. They've got, good resume templates, and you've got templates for cover letters. And then there's ATS-like software out there that mimics how they would filter for keywords. So, an inexpensive one for job seekers out there is called Skillify. Actually, no, sorry. That was an error. Skill Syncer. Skill Syncer is the one that you can use to see what keywords you might be missing. And so you want to stack the odds in your favor when creating your resume. And so what I'll do with my clients is I'll say, okay, what are the top 3 job postings you're going for that are triangulated in a specific direction? Because if you're applying to all different things and trying to be everyone to everybody, it's going to be less effective. So you want to get specific and targeted, and then you want to use the language from the job postings. And then once you've gotten that massaged in, you run that through your own ATS scanner, and then that allows you to refine it and get it even a little bit more relevant.
All right. And how do we, or what are the steps that we take so that all of this doesn't just feel like a message in a bottle? In other words, when you send your resume, let's say you put it through one of these programs that you've recommended, and you've got the keywords and you've tightened everything up to the point where you feel it's in prime condition, or at least prime to possibly be looked at, and you send it out there. What do you do as a follow-up? Is there any follow-up that you can do, or is it just a matter of maintaining your networking, your outreach? What is there? Are there concrete next steps, and do they vary for different industries?
So in general, what you want to do is you want to connect with a human however possible. So for example, I've got a client who applied for a job at Apple last week, and he went through the application process, and then it was like, okay, who do we know at Apple? He had one friend, so he reached out to her and said, okay, hey, can you put my resume in front of the hiring manager? And I happen to know a recruiter at Apple, so I did the same. So not just reaching out to one person, but multiple people to help get that name in front of that person more often. It's like an ad. You want to get more impressions, and the more impressions you get, the more it will stick. So when you know someone, use that. And that reference is really powerful. When you don't know someone, use LinkedIn search functionality. Look, first for first degree connections at the company, then look for second degree connections at the company, and just do that homework to see like, hey, who can connect me here and who can get me in? And, and be persistent. Another one of my clients is trying to get into a product job at a mapping software company. And she's, been in software and mapping her entire career, and pinged LinkedIn, got an introduction, and then followed up a couple of times, and it went quiet. And I was like, okay, well, A, maybe she's not interested, but B, let's try a different approach. Let's email her. Let's revise the outreach to her. Let's appeal to her ego. Let's do these steps, and maybe email will be stickier than LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
Multiple forms of contact, referrals. This sounds like sales.
Yes. And I want to dovetail on that. I want to dovetail on that idea because, Glenn, you and I have spoken about this quite a bit over the years. And that is the number of touches that you should expect before you can actually make a connection, or not a connection, but before you can make a sale. Let's put it in terms of sale. So I want to look through that prism at the next step, which is once your resume gets noticed and you, whatever the next step may be, whether it's a phone conversation or an actual, maybe an online interview, or maybe it's a video interview that you record yourself. Are there steps prior to that so that that initial human to human contact is not as cold? In other words, are you priming the pump too much to continue to reach out to that person prior to the scheduled event that's going to occur? Or do you just build up what you need and then dazzle them in the moment?
It's a good question. So you want to keep priming the pump if you don't have that event in the books. In other words, you don't want to give up before you've had a reply back. Now, with that, you don't want to badger somebody and have them think you're a stalker. When it comes time for an interview, a colleague of mine who's another career coach offered this tip up the other day, which I really like. Let's say you're past the phone screen and you're going to the interview, writing to the hiring manager and saying, hey, is there any way that I can prepare for this interview? Do you guys have any standard questions that you use? And sometimes they'll even give you those questions, right? So you can prepare that way, and then you can feel more confident. And like a good salesperson, you want to have your story and your pitch ready. And Paul, I know you work a lot with clients on this, as do I. The first tell me about yourself, really critical. You want to keep it short. You want to make a case for yourself like a lawyer, and you want to keep it conversational and fun, right? I actually have a Post-it note up here that I was kind of guiding a client to is, remember when you're interviewing, have a little fun and don't be too, rigid. And when you're in the interviews, you don't want to access stories like you're trying to remember facts, right? You want to make it as interesting for the interviewer as possible. And so one of the devices I like to use with my clients is like, okay, we've got our stories. They can follow that STAR format, the situation, task, action, result, or CAR, challenge, action, result. But you don't want to just go straight through that. But what I like to coach my clients is, okay, let's come up with the most emotional point of this story and drop them in. So there I was. They dropped me in a new company with an archaic product and 3 teams that weren't talking to each other. And we were about to lose 50 customers worth $20 million. And I had to turn the ship around. Was I going to do it? Let me tell you how I approach this. Create a little bit of suspense, and then run through it a little bit, and then tie it up at the end. But we want to create a reason for them to be interested and use devices to do that.
Let me ask you this: in the age we're in, do you have anyone or recommend anyone that they actually may send a video email versus just a written email to communicate with somebody along the path?
That's a good question. And I would think it depends on how well the person does on video. So, for example, it took me a while to get comfortable like talking directly to a camera like I'm doing right now. And there was a lot of, it's like easier to talk on Zoom. You're looking down at the screen, right? But to come up with an effective form of communication, I don't normally advise that, but I know in sales, I've tried that before, and I'm sure it probably could be effective.
Yeah, I just know sometimes if I'm having a hard time getting Paul on the phone, if I can send him a video, give him something for free, start the law of reciprocity, and then ask for something in return, my odds kind of go up if Paul and I don't know each other very well. So I just wondered how that kind of communicated over. Now, back to what you were asking about or talking about with an interview. If someone's comfortable with it, do you recommend that they ask questions to, again, get the interviewer talking about themselves? Because it's kind of like an old sales adage, when they're talking about themselves, they're not worried about you as much or whatever. They calm down, they kind of relax or whatever, and it kind of changes the dynamic of the conversation.
Yeah. Well, I first want to highlight that that's a great point, is that if we can make it more conversational and getting the other person talking about themselves, changing that ratio of who's speaking increases your odds, because people do like to talk. And if it's too one-sided, they'll be thinking, okay, I'm going to zone out. This person's answering. What's my next meeting? Yada, yada, instead of being engaged. So to that end, let's say we take the tell me about yourself question, right? At the end of that, instead of rambling on and on and on about your career where they start to lose interest and check out, like let's keep it to a minute, 90 seconds, etc., like short and sweet like a commercial. At the end of that, you can say, was there anything that you wanted to double click on there that you're interested in? Or, I'm actually curious, what are the biggest challenges that you're facing right now? And how do you think my experience might be relevant to that, or where you think there might be holes in my experience? I'm curious.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. How do you answer tell me a little bit about yourself? And just to share one of the approaches that I use is, and Ben, you and I have spoken about this, we're very big on developing and preparing stories for the interview process so that you really know the stories that do define you. And I always tell everyone, probably one of the hardest things to do is to give yourself permission, because of the dynamic of interviewer and interviewee, to just launch right into one of those stories. So what's really important is the segue phrases, what you use to literally just launch yourself right into a story. And I always tell everyone the best segue sentence out of tell me a little bit about yourself goes like this. One of the most important things I've learned is, and then you go right into it, because it's literally an undeniable statement, because the person can't say, well, you didn't learn that, or it's not important to you, because both things are ultimately universally true. And so you then have the permission to just go right into one of those stories. And you're right about 90 seconds. First impressions are complete in 90 seconds. So that can be tough.
How about asking without asking? You know, Paul, I always like educating myself. That Better Business speech, who wrote that? I always like to read more stuff. Oh, that's you? Or,
Yes.
Ben, I remember when my daughters were in the first grade and they made those plaster things with their hands and their feet. Who's that? You're saying the same things, but you're being a little bit around the corner instead of direct.
Right. And one of those other questions that I'm sure that you have advised your clients to utilize, Ben, is just dipping back into ego again of the interviewer and saying, when you first started with the company, and then go into whatever your question might be that is relevant to you considering taking this job, whatever that might be. When you first joined the company, was the interview process the same? I'm not saying that necessarily would be the question. Or when you first joined the company, was there as strong a mission statement as I see now on your website? I mean, just something like that shows, again, that you did do the due diligence, but you're also allowing them to talk about their personal experience rather than, maybe not the first question that you would have for an interviewer would be, what are the challenges you guys are facing? But that has a place. It has a place, but I think you have to warm up to it. And I go back to human behavior, which is exactly what we're discussing here, because you're talking about connecting and persuading. And I always say we're all in the same business. We're all in the persuasion business in one way, shape, or form.
Yeah. One question I love that dovetails off that in creating rapport, right? Because we want to create rapport. And zooming out from this question is, most likely, if you're in there interviewing, they think you're qualified enough because they've reviewed your resume. So now it's more about, is this person a good work wife or work husband? Do I think I can work with them and that would be enjoyable? And so to that end, this question kills two birds with one stone, and the other stone being, the other bird. And I actually don't like that expression, but that's for another day. I don't want to be killing birds. But the other question is, what's your work culture like in terms of work-life balance? So instead of asking that question, we can ask, what do you like to do in your spare time? Then we're learning more about the interviewer and getting them to talk about themselves. And if they say something like spare time, or if they're like looking up and they're trying to figure it out, they're probably working a lot. But you can learn about them personally and connect with them if they do have hobbies. And if not, and they're like, I don't remember the last time I did anything for myself, then you know that there might be a flag with the company culture. And I want to double click on that, because with the question asking process, we want to, prior to the interview, know what our happiness criteria are in a company, be clear on that, and have questions around that so that we can interview the interviewer to see if this company matches our criteria. Like, how do you guys reward employees? How do you guys make decisions? What's the overall management style? How do the executives interact with the director and below levels? So we can get clues to see what type of culture this is and seeing if it is a good fit.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a question for both of you guys, because in sales, the old adage is information or statistics tell, stories sell. So do you recommend doing homework, finding out about the people? And again, like I always do, I'm always looking around the room to find some degree of separation, some way to relate to people. So if I saw a golf ball with a hole in one or something on there, I may talk about a story where, at one point I shanked it right into this presentation right into the water, and I had to lay up and go after it again. Or if I see someone likes boating or whatever, I might talk about running out of gas in the middle of the lake or stuff like that, just so again you can find ways to relate to that person without being direct and asking them, oh, you like boating?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is a matter of I always say you have to give a little bit before you're going to get. So sometimes those really wide open questions can be a little off-putting. So you always have to consider what part of my perspective am I going to share, and how will it be communicated through the type of question or the wording of the question that I'm asking.
Yeah. But Glenn, that is some advanced Jedi moves right there that you mentioned. A couple other ones in terms of creating rapport without being too obvious are, from NLP. Certain people are visual type of folks, certain people are auditory, and certain people are kinesthetic. So a lot of people use language I see, they'll talk quickly, and they'll be very animated. So if you can match that energy and use visual type of language, then you'll create more rapport with them. People with auditory, I hear you exactly, and they talk a little bit slower. I'm more in the auditory type of realm, and then the kinesthetic people are a little bit slower. Let me see how that feels, and you can use language and start to match that. And that's another way to match them. In addition to their body language, you could match that without being too overt, and that helps create that rapport too. And those are some of those advanced things that you don't want to be too obvious about, but can help at that subconscious level.
Is there a ratio of jobs that you should be applying to on a weekly basis in order to get the kind of results you're looking for? Or do you just focus all of your energy on that handful of companies that you think will have an opportunity that works for you, or has posted an opportunity you think is a good fit? Is there just, like Glenn in sales, there's a certain ratio, there's a certain percentage of people that are going to pay attention? And at what point are you just overworking the system, your system, emotionally as well? And at what point are you not doing enough? Is there a guidelines, or does it change with every individual?
So it varies per individual. And the spectrum I would consider is relevancy to the job. The more relevant that you are, the more you can apply and think about getting a callback. Like, am I a slam dunk for this role, or am I a reach? So the more relevant you are, you could spend a little bit more time applying. The rule of thumb I use with my clients is thinking about splitting up their time and energy. And 80% of the time, I invite them to work on the networking approach and reach outs and the research around that. And 20% of the time, applying online, because you don't want to cut that off totally, but you're going to get the best results from reach outs, right? And so depending on if the person's working full time or not, I will say, okay, can you do, 5 reach outs a day? Can you do 10 reach outs a day? And if you do that consistently, let's say 1 out of every 10 reach outs will potentially lead to a referral to a interview, and you play that out over a couple of months, you can see how that is a much better game to play than the 1 in 100, 1 in 200 applicant game.
So, do you run into? I ran this with salespeople. I ran this with business people. I run into it everywhere when you're looking to obtain more business. So, do you run into it from people that are looking for a new job when they say, "I don't have time," and you have to call, and say, "What do you do at lunch every day? What do you do after you get home for the next day? You really have more time than you think. So, are you really putting the effort forth? Is this important to you?"
Yeah, you gotta have that tough love. And if they don't have any gas in the tank, then it's not that important to them. We make decisions about our time. It's not like, I work with my clients. It's not like I'm going to try and do X today. It's like the wise master Yoda said, do or do not. There is no try. And there's a huge difference between making a decision towards doing something versus trying to do something where you give yourself that out. And, one of the things that I start with my clients is personal integrity, right? We all know what integrity is. It's keeping our word to others, but we're most likely to lie to ourselves. And when we do that, I'm going to go to the gym, I'm going to eat better, we lose confidence because we don't believe ourselves anymore. So we want to instill that sense of personal integrity back and do that, not only in the job search process, but other processes, so that muscle gets stronger and people start doing what they say they're going to do, and become better self leaders and making those commitments.
Mm-hmm.
Can I follow up on that, Paul?
Sure.
And again, I've worked with this working with people to sell. If you don't believe in yourself, no one's going to believe in you. If you don't believe in your product, no one's going to buy your product. So how often do you run into the situation where people need to develop a little bit more self-esteem before they're ever going to get to that interview, get that job, move on to where they want?
It's a good question. And this actually brings me into like one of the most fascinating parts that I love about all of this. So 3 main pillars to the program that I offer at a high level. One is removing the blocks and the self-sabotage, and it kind of addresses that. 2 is that clarity of vision. 3 is the strategy and tactics. And we've spent a lot of time in the strategy and tactics land. I help my clients get clarity, but that self-sabotage and those blocks, we get to look at under the hood at where people are stopping themselves. And helping change people's behaviors and beliefs is really why I do what I do, because that's where the real rubber meets the road. Because you can have strategies and tactics for days, but if you don't have the right mindset, you're not going to get it done. So for example, a client I was talking to, she's making a pivot from the education space into the consulting space. And she's like, I don't get why these recruiters aren't reaching out to me. And I had to educate her. I had to say, hey, recruiters are trying to put that square peg in the square hole. So they're not really incentivized to stretch for you. And then she's like, oh, maybe I should, only apply for education roles. And I had to remind her, no, let's keep our eye on the prize. You're getting good traction talking with consulting people. Keep your eye on the prize and keep going for it. So it is this recommitment to the vision and understanding that we get to build up our belief system, understand where our beliefs may be holding us back, and work to rewire those in many different ways.
So let's just take a little bit of a comparison between the last time you were here on Blabbit and now. And I know I may be off by a few months or half a year, or who knows at this point how much time I'm off. Glenn, no comments, please. But if we look back on that, Ben, we were talking about the Great Resignation. In other words, that mood that everybody felt, or not everybody, but a lot of people felt like they could do better, whatever it might be. Does that mood still exist to the level that it did, or has there been a little pullback because, like with most things, reality sets in?
So I think the constant is people are always looking for better opportunities. And we're in a unique time. It's slowed down a bit in the past couple months, but we're in, especially in certain fields, a time where there are a lot of opportunities out there, even though there is a lot of competition. The trends that I find are that people experienced the flexibility of working from home and not commuting during the pandemic. And so that is driving a lot of changes that people want to make, saying, hey, and this isn't across the board. Some people love that interaction, but more and more people are like, I want to have that flexibility to work where I want to work from. I want to have flexibility within my day to not be chained to a desk from, 8 to 5, 9 to 5, et cetera. And so more and more people are seeking out opportunities that meet that happiness criteria for them.
It's interesting how so much has changed. I really don't like it because some of us have lived our lives like that for years, and we liked keeping that secret of flexibility and not being chained to a desk.
Yeah, 100%. But there's it's a world of abundance out there, and more people get to experience that.
So I know one thing that I've had a hard time getting salespeople to understand over the years is, at this time, until someone signs an agreement, writes you a check, they're not a client. So you have nothing to lose because right now you have nothing in your hand. So at times, is it good to explain to somebody when they're doing this interview, when they're doing this, to just go for it? Because right now they don't have that job, they don't have an offer, so they really have nothing to lose at this point.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and how I would answer that, and where I coach my clients, where I see the most need for coaching, is to connect with people at an emotional level. So with that, like, what are you really passionate about? So I was with a client yesterday, and he was preparing for the presentation portion of an interview, and he's in the analytics field. And I'm like, you're a genius at analytics, but if they're not going to feel you, then they're not going to buy into you. And I made this reference, and it's embarrassing, but it's fun to share. I was watching a terrible show on Netflix, Bling Empire, and it's a terrible reality show. But anyways, in it, two of the characters gave a pitch for their non-alcoholic drink, and the one that won the competition was the guy talking about his sobriety journey and how much he's transformed, and the passion that he had helped push him to the winner spot. Now, that could have all been scripted, but on the receiving end of that show, it got me. And so I want to coach my clients to really step away from trying to impress people with facts and figures and proving themselves, and really connect emotionally with people, because that's what resonates at that energetic level. And that's that thing that will really push them over the edge, so that people not just hear them, but feel them.
Statistics tell and stories sell.
Yes.
Where did we hear that before?
And Glenn, it goes back to what Fletch said many, many months ago, which is, if this person who's speaking just shared that story, whatever comes out of their mouth next, I'm going to believe. So there is that connection, that willingness to share an experience, and a relatable experience. And honestly, if you tell it the right way, any experience is relatable. It really is. And that is the best way that we as listeners, not just interviewers, but anyone, and not just decision makers, but listeners in general, determine whether somebody has understanding, ability, experience, aspiration. It's by listening to a story. It is the easiest way to process checking off those boxes in your mind. And that is what leads to that trust, and ultimately to the persuasion.
100%.
We've talked on here a ton of times about authenticity, congruency, and stuff like this. Do you ever tell people, the right person at the right time, to maybe have a little bit of self-deprecation in that story, because everyone else is walking through that door is trying to paint them as Superman, as opposed to actually being human while you're in that interview?
It's a good question, and I would reframe that from self-deprecation to vulnerability, and maybe being in a position where they didn't have it all figured out, and something, that goes back to what we were just talking about, that relatability, versus downplaying themselves. So I think the more vulnerable you can be, the more somebody can see, share, and feel you. But sometimes self-deprecation can come off almost as a lack of authenticity or insecurity. So it's a fine balance depending on the delivery.
Yeah, and I'll give a perfect example. And so many coaches who do coach on interviews and whatnot will tell you, well, you should always have a leadership story prepared. And to a certain degree, that is true. But I think a slight adjustment that definitely weaves in a little bit of that vulnerability that you're talking about, Ben, is I characterize it as being, tell me your reluctant leader story. In other words, why were you reluctant? Why were you unsure at first? And maybe what were some of the thoughts going through your mind, some of the possibilities, the opportunities for failure if you take on this responsibility? What were some of those? So that reluctance, I think, weaves in a bit of that vulnerability as well. And that's one of the important stories that I have my clients work on.
Yeah, and a couple of the mechanics to feed off what you were saying is, sometimes think about those TV shows that you're interested in. It's like, the more drama there is, the more interested you are in it. So instead of just like, I was a leader and I killed it, XYZ, that reluctant leader thing gives them, okay, this person was at point A and we didn't know how they were going to make it to point C, but by illustrating point B, and that bridge to realization, or that growth or transformation moment, like, that's all part of that hero's journey and myth that we love. And so if we can frame it in that way, as opposed to like, I'm just an alpha and I kill it everywhere I go, it helps that relatability.
Yeah, I think a story that I've been able to share a couple different times over the years was, there were two different situations where we did A through F. And then sitting down, taking a look at stuff, it made sense to go A, E, C, B, D, F. and around. So the first time after that went on to a management position that was a little bit larger, someone said, what are we going to do? And I said, I don't know. I have to get to know Ben and get to know Paul, because I have to figure out what order we need to do these things in for it to work here, because it may be a different order than it worked over there.
That's a good one too. And that is an actual experience. But I mean, that's a good story template that you can utilize, is shaking up the prescribed steps. It shows ingenuity. It shows intuition. It shows good perspective and oversight of what it is you're trying to accomplish, keeping your eye on the prize, so to speak.
100%.
Well, I know we got started a few moments late, but I don't know what everyone has for commitments, so I don't want to hold everyone over here. We're about 5 minutes from the end of the hour. So Ben, thank you very much. It's been a great time talking to you. It's always interesting talking about different facets of similar techniques. If anybody would want to reach out to you, Ben, what's the best way to do so?
So my website is purposeup.com. So that's the word purpose and up.com. Coach Ben Stein on Instagram. And those are the two easiest ways to find me, or you could put those search terms into LinkedIn. Those are the places that I hang out the most. And, if you're interested in connecting about any of this, don't be bashful about the, 10-minute intro call to see if it is a potential good fit. And I love the similarities between sales and the word I like to use, and I use with my clients, and I'm sure you use this too, is enrollment. You're enrolling people in the possibility of you. And like you said, Glenn, if you don't believe it yourself, you're not going to get the other person to buy into it. But learning these enrollment strategies and tactics and energetically getting behind it, if you work on all of those, you'll convert a lot more, and you'll get more of what you want.
Yeah, I think especially when you're doing the interview, it's sales should be a 4-letter word. I like providing solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're interviewing, you better be providing solutions to that hiring manager, or they're never going to hire you.
That's a good point of view. And Ben, we love when you hang out here on Blabbit. We will certainly have you back again if you'll have us. And thank you so much for sharing your insights with our Blabbit family.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, thanks a lot. We'll see everyone back same time, same channels next week, hopefully with a little bit less technical difficulty.